In the village of Olori, status was measured by the brilliance of one's cloth. The villagers were famous weavers, but their hearts had become as stiff as starched linen. They competed fiercely, hiding their best dyes and refusing to teach the orphan children, fearing that someone else might become more successful than them. Among them lived a young girl named Elara. While the other weavers bought expensive silks from the city, Elara lived in a small hut at the edge of the forest and collected the stolen threads, the tiny bits of colorful yarn that caught on bushes or were tossed out as waste by the wealthy looms. The villagers mocked her. "Look at Elara," they would giggle. "She weaves rags from rubbish. She will never be invited to the king's banquet." Elara didn't mind. She found beauty in the discarded. She believed that every thread, no matter how short, had a story to tell. One evening, as a cold winter wind began to howl through Olori, an old man arrived at the village gates. He was draped in a cloak so thin it looked like cobwebs, and he shivered violently. He knocked on the doors of the grandest weavers, begging for a small scrap of wool to cover his freezing shoulders. "Away with you!" shouted the first weaver. "I am busy preparing my golden tapestry for the festival. I have no time for beggars." The second weaver didn't even open her door. "Go to the next village. Your dust will ruin my white silk." The old man walked until he reached the very last hut. Elara saw him through her window and rushed out. She didn't have much food and her fire was small, but she pulled him inside immediately. "I have no cloak to give you, grandfather," Elara said sadly, looking at her bare walls. "But I have these." She picked up her basket of stolen threads, thousands of tiny mismatched pieces of yarn. All night, while the old man slept by the hearth, Elara worked. She tied the tiny fragments together with delicate knots, weaving a patchwork scarf so long and thick it could wrap around the man 3 times. It wasn't one color. It was a riot of every color imaginable: the blue of a discarded hem, the red of a tangled bobbin, the green of a snagged sleeve. The next morning, the man woke up to find the warm, vibrant scarf tucked around him. He smiled, his eyes twinkling like morning dew. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he whispered. "It is made of 1,000 kindnesses." He reached into his pocket and handed Elara a small, rusted iron needle. "Keep this, child. It only sews what the heart feels." Elara thanked him, and the man vanished into the mist. Weeks later, the king's messengers arrived for the great festival. Every weaver brought their finest work. The village square was a sea of gold and silver. Elara arrived last, carrying a simple tunic she had sewn with a rusted needle using her scrap threads. The villagers laughed. "A rag tunic for the king. You'll be thrown in the dungeon." But when the head messenger laid eyes on the tapestries, he shook his head. "Beautiful," he said, touching the gold cloth, "but cold. There is no soul here." Then he saw Elara's tunic. As he touched it, the stolen threads began to glow. Because the threads had been gathered from the bushes where birds nested and the paths where children played, and because Elara had sewn it with a heart full of love, the cloth felt like a warm embrace. "This," the messenger cried, "this is the true spirit of our kingdom." He revealed that the old man in the thin cloak had been the king himself, traveling in disguise to see if his people still cared for one another. The king didn't just buy Elara's tunic. He appointed her as the royal weaver. But Elara made one condition. She would only accept if she could open a school in the village to teach everyone, especially the orphans, how to weave. The villagers, seeing how Elara's worthless scraps had brought her to the palace, felt a deep sense of shame. They realized that in their race for gold, they had lost their warmth. From that day on, Olori became known not for the price of its silk, but for the depth of its generosity. And Elara continued to weave, proving to everyone that no thread is too short, and no act of kindness is ever too small to change the world. The king's decree changed the village of Olori almost overnight. Where there once was the clatter of jealous tongues, there was now the rhythmic hum of many looms working in harmony. Elara's school, built under the shade of a massive baobab tree, became the beating heart of the community. But as the years passed, a new challenge arrived. Not from within, but from across the great mountains. Word of the glow of Olori reached the neighboring kingdom of Vestra, a place of cold stone and iron, ruled by Queen Seraphina. Seraphina was a woman who believed that everything had a price and that beauty could be manufactured through force. She arrived in Olori with a parade of armored guards, her eyes fixed on the rusted iron needle tucked into Elara's belt. "I have seen your cloth," the queen said, her voice like cracking ice. "It glows with a light my finest alchemists cannot replicate. They say it is the needle. Give it to me, and I will leave your village in peace. Refuse, and I will tax your trade until Olori is nothing but dust." The villagers, who had only recently learned to be kind, felt the old shadow of fear creeping back. They looked at Elara, hoping she would simply give up the rusted tool to save them. Elara stepped forward and pulled the needle from her belt. "The needle is yours, Majesty. But be warned, it only sows what the heart feels." Queen Seraphina laughed, snatched the needle, and returned to her mountain palace. She gathered the most skilled laborers in her land and commanded them to sew a great mantle of power. She wanted a cloak that would outshine the sun. But a strange thing happened. When the master weavers of Vestra tried to use the needle, it became heavy as lead. When they forced it through the silk, the fabric didn't glow. It turned gray and brittle, crumbling like dead leaves. When the queen herself tried to use it, the needle pricked her finger, and the drop of blood turned into a cold, sharp thorn. Enraged, the queen returned to Olori during the height of a bitter, unexpected frost. "You lied to me," she screamed at Elara. "The needle is cursed. It has ruined my silk and wounded my hand." Elara didn't answer with words. Instead, she pointed toward the village square. A great frost had indeed gripped the land, but the people of Olori weren't hiding in their homes. Following Elara's example, the villagers had spent the week gathering the stolen threads of their now prosperous lives, the scraps left over from the king's orders. They were weaving a massive, village-wide quilt. Orphans worked alongside elders, and the once greedy master weavers were teaching the queen's own cold-shivering guards how to tie the knots of the patchwork of mercy. As they worked together, the quilt began to pulse with a soft, golden light that radiated enough heat to melt the snow around the square. Elara turned to the queen. "The needle did not work for you because you sought to sew a shroud of vanity. My people are sewing a blanket of protection. The needle is just iron, Seraphina. The magic was the warmth you refused to feel." Queen Seraphina looked at her pricked finger, then at her guards, who had dropped their spears to help an old woman carry a heavy bundle of wool. For the first time in her life, the queen felt a different kind of cold, the loneliness of her own heart. She reached out not to take the needle back, but to touch the glowing quilt. As her fingers brushed the colorful scraps, the gray, brittle silk of her own tunic began to catch a faint, shimmering light. "Teach me," the queen whispered. Elara smiled and handed her a basket of mismatched threads. "The first lesson is easy, Majesty. You must be willing to use the scraps that others throw away." Queen Seraphina stayed in Olori for a month. When she finally returned to the Iron Peaks, she didn't take the rusted needle. She took something far more powerful, the knowledge that a kingdom is not held together by iron walls, but by the threads of compassion that connect the highest queen to the lowliest beggar. Olori and Vestra became twin cities of light. And Elara, old and wise, was often seen sitting under the baobab tree, reminding the new generation of weavers. A single thread is easily broken, but 1,000 scraps tied together with love can keep the whole world warm.